No sign of age was upon them, unless it were in the depths of their eyes, for these were keen as lances in the starlight, and yet profound, the wells of deep memory. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted, for ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, I passed over the mountains, and together, through ages of the world, we have fought the long defeat. Hey friends, welcome to Seeking Stories. We are working on a Lord of the Rings read-along right now. Today we're talking about the chapter, The Mirror of Galadriel. So much happens here. Tolkien completely changes a little bit of pace. We go from the Mines of Moria to this elf land that seems to be something directly out of time in a way. And it is out of time, as we'll get to in a few minutes. But first, who are these characters of Galadriel and Kelliborn? We've met various elves. We have Elrond, who's the Lord of Rivendell. We have Legolas, who comes from Mirkwood. And then we have these elves that seem like higher elves than anything. And they really are. These are the oldest living elves on Middle-earth. They were present in the First Age for all the major events that happened. Although Galadriel and Kelliborn did not play a very large role in those events, still they were there present at a time when the Elder Elves were very populous and they were kind of the focus of this world. And that has dwindled, and now it is really just them. There's also Elrond. There's another elf who kind of lives by the shore, which we will see much later on. And of course, there's other pockets of elves as well, but those pockets of elves are really elves that came about in the Second Age, or elves who were born later on. Galadriel and Kelliborn are really the only elves, for the most part, that have seen all the ages of Middle-earth and can see the ups and the downs, the defeats, the victories, and what has to happen next. So they really do have that wisdom and those pools of memory to pull from to make decisions, which is really, in a way, Galadriel's hindsight looking back on the world is how she's able to break through to Gimli and break through the animosity that naturally exists between elves and dwarves. She says to Gimli, "Dark is the water of Khazad-dûm, and cold are the springs of Kildanala, and fair were the many-pillared halls of Khazad-dûm in elder days before the fall of mighty kings beneath the stone." She looked upon Gimli, who sat glowering and sad, and she smiled, and the dwarf, hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue, looked up and met her eyes, and it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy and saw there love and understanding. And one thing to understand is that dwarves have a secret language which they do not teach anyone. They occasionally use a few names from their own language, like Khazad-dûm, meaning Moria, just in normal speech. You'll hear Gimli kind of give a couple of dwarvish battle cries later on in the books. But for the most part, people don't know the dwarf language. And let me rephrase that. People don't know the dwarf language outside the dwarf language. It's a secret language. But a few words like these names of Moria are kind of known to the wise. And the fact that Galadriel made it a point to address Gimli's kind of not ancestral home in a way, because Moria wasn't really his ancestral home, but a home that many of his people try to reclaim recently, and she knows the grief and the sorrow that is there, and use the language that he is part of his people, his culture, and is very important to him. That's what breaks down the barriers. She is intentional with him, and Gimli knows this. It shows here the power of words and the power of languages. If you talk to someone for a while and they never use your name, you might not think anything of it, but when someone starts calling you by your name in a good sense, and you can tell they're making a true effort to remember who you are, especially if they don't know you well, and to use your name, that's powerful. You remember that. And that's what happens to Gimli here. He knows that Galadriel is making a true, genuine attempt to give him peace, but not just saying the things that she wants to say, but using words that she knows that will mean a lot to him. So we start to see those walls crumble. And then later on, we start seeing Legolas and Gimli going throughout Lothlorien together, and the company marveling at this. For how can an elf and a dwarf become friends? But we see in these dark times, those walls, that division, start to crumble, which is one of those great themes of Tolkien's writing. So now we come to the Mirror of Galadriel. Remember that the mirror shows many things, and not all have yet come to pass. Some never come to be, unless those that behold the visions turn aside from their path to prevent them. The mirror is dangerous, is a guide of deeds. Which begs the question, why does Galadriel have Frodo and Sam look into the mirror when she knows that the mirror is a dangerous guide of deeds? It reminds me of the old, I think, Greek tale, Oedipus Rex. You have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe it's the character whose parents hear the prophecy that their son will kill his father and marry his mother. And basically that comes about exactly because the parents took steps to try to avoid this doom and set the son on the path to accomplish the very thing he was prophesied to do. So Galadriel warns the characters that trying to stop the things that might happen just by going out of your way to do that probably isn't the best thing to do. But I think knowing what is to come, generally speaking, for Frodo and Sam, particularly Frodo, of course, I think Galadriel wants Frodo to get an idea, even more so, of the weight and the gravity of his quest so that he doesn't turn aside. But let me know your thoughts. This chapter is open to a lot of debate amongst the Tolkien community as far as why Galadriel had them look in the first place. And then of course you have Galadriel showing her ring, Nenya, the ring of adamant, the ring of water. Now it is revealed in this chapter that Galadriel has one of the 3 rings of power that were kind of made for the elves. And that is a big reveal to us. It doesn't play a whole lot into the story as far as what happens in future events, but is important to understand the rings of power that were given to, or really made for the elves, the 3 elven rings, to understand really the grief and the doom that is coming upon the elves no matter what the outcome. Do you not see now wherefore your coming is to us as the footstep of doom? For if you fail, then we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will dwindle to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten. So what does this actually mean? Because Tolkien really doesn't make it abundantly clear in Lord of the Rings exactly what happened historically so that if Sauron is defeated, the elves also fade away. So we have to go back to the Second Age when Sauron, he had a fair form at the time and he was not yet revealed to be the evil Dark Lord that he is. He was guiding elven craftsmen, elven smiths, who were experimenting with rings of power, and he guided them towards creating rings of power, all the meanwhile having the intent of creating the one ring, the Master Ring, the ring that Frodo has, to control the other rings. And the idea is that when Sauron put on the Ring of Power, he could control the people and the races that had the other rings on. Of course, he gave 9 rings to men, and those men became the Ringwraiths and fell into shadow. 7 were given to the dwarves, and the dwarves proved a lot more resilient than Sauron was anticipating and couldn't really be controlled through the one ring so much. But several of the rings were consumed by dragonfire, and the other 3, the kingdoms that were really founded by them, were laid to waste because those rings, even though Sauron could not truly control those dwarves, those rings offered kind of a great greed. So those kingdoms that were founded around those treasure troves, like the kingdom under the mountain from the Hobbit that was founded under a dwarven ring, and of course we know what happened there. But the 3 rings of the elves, Sauron never touched those rings. He guided the craftsmen in creating them, but they never touched his hand actually. And when Sauron created the ring and put the ring on his finger, the 3 elves who held those rings understood that they were deceived, and they instantly took those rings off and did not put them back on until Sauron was initially defeated at the end of the Second Age. And then after Sauron was defeated, they were able to use those rings to grow their kingdoms. Elrond has one of the rings, and Galadriel has one of the rings, and her ring is really the ring of preservation, and that is how she's able to keep that little chunk of Middle-earth, that area of Lothlorien, as a time out of memory, a time of the First Age, and keep it in such a way that it mimics and evokes the First Age of Middle-earth in the time of the elves. The fate of those 3 rings, because Sauron helped in the design of them, is tied to the fate of the One Ring. And if and when the One Ring is destroyed, it's likely, the elves don't know this for sure, but they believe that those 3 rings will lose their power and their kingdoms will fade. And basically the elves will, I mean, they're not gonna die, but their kingdoms and that memory will fade away and be no more. So the elves are really fighting this battle they can't win. If Sauron reclaims the ring and claims victory, they're done. But conversely, if the ring is destroyed, the 3 elven rings will lose their power and the elven kingdoms will fade. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's that deep sadness of the elven culture right at this time in Middle-earth, and it just adds another layer that, you know, there are going to be consequences no matter what happens. So on that somber note, let me know what your thoughts are, and I will see you tomorrow for the last chapter on Lothlorien before the Fellowship embarks on their final stage of their quest in the Fellowship of the Ring.